The television studio was quieter than usual that evening, the kind of hushed atmosphere that settles over a place when everyone knows they're about to witness something extraordinary, something that will be remembered long after the cameras stop rolling and the lights go dark. And Maria Dolores dos Santos Viveros de Vero sat in the guest chair with her hands folded carefully in her lap, her silver hair perfectly styled, but her eyes carrying the weight of memories she had kept buried for decades, because some stories are too painful to tell until the right moment arrives. The interviewer, a seasoned journalist who had spoken with presidents and celebrities and survivors of unimaginable tragedies, found herself unusually nervous as she prepared to ask questions that would unlock secrets about one of the world's most famous families. Secrets that had been whispered about in the narrow streets of Funchal, but never confirmed by the one person who had lived through every moment of struggle and sacrifice that had shaped Cristiano Ronaldo from a poor island boy into a global icon, whose success seemed impossible until you understood the price that had been paid for it. Dona Maria, the interviewer began gently, using the formal address that showed respect for a woman whose dignity had never wavered despite the hardships she had endured. There are stories about your family's early years, about the sacrifices you made for Cristiano's football career, but you've never spoken publicly about the details, about what it really cost your family to pursue his dreams when you had so little to begin with, and every decision meant choosing between immediate needs and distant hopes. Maria Dolores took a deep breath, her weathered hands betraying the tremor that comes not from age, but from emotions kept too long in check, and when she began to speak, her voice carried the quiet strength of a woman who had faced impossible choices with grace and determination, never allowing her children to see the full weight of what she was carrying on their behalf. "People think they know our story," she said, her Portuguese accent thick with emotion. "They see Cristiano now with his cars and houses and trophies, and they think it was always easy, that talent was enough. But they don't know about the nights I didn't eat so my children could have dinner, about the times I cleaned houses until my hands bled so I could pay for his bus fare to practice, about the choice I had to make when he was 12 years old, the choice that nearly broke our family apart but saved his future." The studio fell completely silent, even the camera operators forgetting to adjust their equipment, as they listened to a mother's voice crack with the weight of memories that had shaped not just her son's career, but her own understanding of what love requires when circumstances demand the impossible, when a parent must choose between keeping their child close and giving them the chance to become everything they're capable of becoming. "He was so small," she continued, her eyes focusing on something beyond the cameras, seeing not the luxury of a television studio, but the cramped apartment in Funchal where her family had struggled to make ends meet, where every expense was calculated against their meager income, and where dreams seemed like luxuries they couldn't afford. 12 years old and already showing the kind of talent that made people stop and stare when he played football. But talent doesn't mean anything without opportunity. And opportunity doesn't come to poor families on small islands where the biggest dream most children can have is finding steady work that pays enough to survive. The interviewer leaned forward slightly, sensing that they were approaching the heart of the story that had never been fully told, the moment that had changed everything for the Ronaldo family and set in motion the events that would eventually make Cristiano one of the most recognizable faces on the planet, but at a cost that few people understood because success stories rarely include the full accounting of what was lost along the way to victory. "Sporting Lisbon wanted him," Maria Dolores said, the words coming slowly as if each one required effort to speak aloud. "They saw what we all saw, that he had something special, something that couldn't be taught or learned, but was just part of who he was. But they wanted him to come to their academy in Lisbon, to leave home and family and everything he had ever known, to train with boys who came from money and privilege while he slept in dormitories and ate cafeteria food and learned to be alone in ways that no 12-year-old should ever have to learn." She paused, wiping away tears that had been building for 25 years. tears for the little boy who had hugged her goodbye at the airport with such trust in his eyes, believing that she would be there when he needed her, even though she was sending him 1,000 kilometers away to live among strangers who might nurture his talent, but could never love him the way his family loved him. Unconditionally and completely, and with the fierce protectiveness that comes from shared struggle and mutual devotion. The decision nearly destroyed me, she admitted, her voice breaking completely now as the cameras captured every moment of a mother's anguish being revealed for the first time. How do you send your baby away when he's all you have, when your family has already lost so much, when keeping your children close is the only thing that makes the poverty and the struggle and the endless worry bearable? But how do you keep him home when you know that staying means watching his dreams die slowly, watching him grow into just another poor boy from Madeira with talent that the world will never see? The interviewer found herself crying too, understanding that she was witnessing not just an interview, but a confession. A mother's reckoning with choices that had haunted her for decades, even as they had proven to be exactly right. Even as they had given the world one of its greatest athletes, and given her son a life beyond anything their family could have imagined during those dark early years, when every day was a struggle, and the future seemed like a luxury they couldn't afford to consider. But that wasn't the hardest part, Maria Dolores continued, and the interviewer wondered how anything could be harder than sending a 12-year-old child away to pursue dreams that might never materialize. How any mother could endure more than that kind of separation and uncertainty. But she was about to learn that some sacrifices cut deeper than distance, that some choices require giving up, not just comfort, but identity. Not just security, but hope for personal happiness. I had to sell everything, she said, the words tumbling out now as if a dam had finally burst, and 25 years of silence were rushing toward the light. Our furniture, my jewelry, even my wedding ring, everything owned of any value had to go to pay for his expenses, for equipment and travel, and all the costs that come with chasing a dream that seems impossible until suddenly it isn't. And I took extra cleaning jobs, worked 16 hours a day scrubbing floors and washing dishes and doing whatever anyone would pay me to do. Because every euro mattered when we were living on nothing and supporting a child whose needs were growing faster than our ability to meet them. The studio audience, carefully selected and briefed to remain quiet during emotional moments, found themselves audibly gasping as they realized the scope of sacrifice that had been required. Not just the dramatic gesture of sending a child away, but the daily grind of working multiple jobs and selling possessions and choosing between basic necessities to fund a dream that might have ended in failure and left the entire family with nothing to show for their investment except debt and heartbreak. There were nights I cried myself to sleep, wondering if I had made the right choice, Maria Dolores admitted, her composure completely gone now as she relived the uncertainty and fear that had dominated those early years when Cristiano was away at the academy, when phone calls were expensive luxuries and visits were impossible because travel cost money they didn't have, when she had to trust that strangers were taking care of her child because she had no other option except bringing him home and watching his potential wither away. He would call crying, saying he wanted to come home, that the other boys were mean to him because of his accent and his clothes and the fact that he came from nowhere while they came from families with money and connections. And I had to be strong for him, even when I was falling apart inside. Had to convince him to stay when every maternal instinct I possessed was screaming at me to bring him home, where I could protect him and love him and make sure he was never lonely or scared or hungry again. The interviewer struggled to find words adequate to respond to such raw honesty, such complete vulnerability from a woman who had spent decades watching her son become famous while keeping her own story private. But Maria Dolores wasn't finished, wasn't done revealing the depths of sacrifice that had been required to transform potential into reality, dreams into achievements that had changed not just their family's circumstances, but their understanding of what was possible when love was combined with determination and the willingness to risk everything for someone else's future. The worst part was lying to him, she said, and this admission seemed to cost her more than all the others combined. The shame in her voice evident as she described how she had hidden their poverty from her son, who was already struggling with homesickness and the pressure of proving himself worthy of the opportunity he had been given. When he asked if we were okay, if we had enough money, if I was eating properly, I always said yes, always told him not to worry about us, that we were fine, and he should focus on his training. But the truth was that we were drowning, that I was working myself to exhaustion, and we were behind on rent, and there were days when I didn't eat anything, so that when he came home for visits, there would be food on the table and he wouldn't know how desperate things had become. The cameras continued rolling as Maria Dolores broke down completely. 25 years of suppressed emotion pouring out in front of millions of viewers who were witnessing the untold story behind one of sport's greatest success stories. The story of a mother who had sacrificed everything, including her own well-being, to give her child the chance to become everything he was capable of becoming, even when that meant years of separation and struggle, and the constant fear that their gamble might fail and leave them with nothing except debt and regret. "There was one night," she whispered, her voice barely audible now as she reached the deepest part of her confession, "when Cristiano was about 14, and he called crying because he had been injured and was scared that his career might be over before it really began, and I spent my last 20 euros on a bus ticket to Lisbon because I couldn't bear the thought of him being alone and afraid. And when I got there, I found him in the infirmary with his leg wrapped up, and he looked at me with such relief and gratitude that I knew I would do it all again, would make every sacrifice 1,000 times over if it meant giving him the chance to become who he was meant to be." The story she told next revealed the moment when their sacrifice had finally begun to pay off, when Cristiano's talent had become impossible to ignore, and other clubs had started making offers. When the boy who had left home as a frightened 12-year-old had grown into a young man whose skill on the football pitch was already attracting attention from some of the biggest teams in Europe. But even success had brought new challenges and new choices that required the same kind of faith and determination that had characterized their journey from the beginning. When Manchester United made their offer, Maria Dolores said, her voice stronger now, as she remembered the moment when their years of struggle had finally begun to transform into something that looked like security. "I couldn't believe it at first, couldn't accept that our little boy from Madeira was wanted by one of the most famous football clubs in the world. But I also knew that accepting meant sending him even further away, to a country where he didn't speak the language, and where he would be completely on his own for the first time in his life. And I had to make peace with the fact that my sacrifice would never really end. That being the mother of someone extraordinary meant learning to let go over and over again." The interviewer asked about the moment when Maria Dolores had first realized that their sacrifice had been worth it, when she had understood that the poverty and struggle and years of separation had resulted in something that justified the pain they had endured, and the answer revealed the depth of a mother's love that had never been about personal gain or reflected glory, but about giving her child every possible opportunity to reach his potential, regardless of the cost to herself. "The first time I saw him play for Portugal in the World Cup," she said, tears flowing freely now, but accompanied by a smile that transformed her entire face. "When they announced his name and he ran onto the pitch wearing our country's colors, representing not just himself but all of us, all the poor families and struggling children who dream of something better, I felt everything we had given up come back to us in that moment. All the sacrifice and pain and worry transformed into pure pride and joy, and the knowledge that we had made the right choice, even when it felt like it was killing us." She described watching from the stands as her son, now a man but still her little boy in her heart, had played with the skill and passion that had been evident even when he was kicking a ball around the dusty streets of Funchal, and how she had cried not just from happiness, but from relief that their faith had been justified, that the years of struggle had led to something beautiful and meaningful, that had changed their lives forever. But the real victory, Maria Dolores concluded, her voice steady now as she reached the end of her story, wasn't the fame or the money or the trophies, though those things have given our family security we never dreamed possible. The real victory was seeing the man he became, seeing that all those years away from home and all the pressure and expectations hadn't changed his heart, hadn't made him forget where he came from or who had loved him when he was just a poor boy with big dreams and nothing else to recommend him to the world. The interview ended with Maria Dolores looking directly into the camera and speaking to mothers everywhere who were facing impossible choices, who were weighing their children's potential against their family's immediate needs, who were wondering whether love sometimes required letting go, even when holding on felt like the only thing keeping them whole. And her message was simple but profound, that sacrifice made from love never truly costs more than it gives. That believing in someone else's dreams can transform not just their life, but your own understanding of what's possible when faith is combined with action and determination. The footage of that interview would be watched millions of times, translated into dozens of languages, and referenced in countless articles about the hidden stories behind public success. But for Maria Dolores dos Santos Viveros da Aveiro, it represented something much simpler and more personal. The first time she had been able to tell the complete truth about what it had cost to raise a son who became a legend, and the first time she had been able to say publicly that despite everything they had given up, despite all the pain and worry and sleepless nights, she would make every single choice exactly the same way if she had to do it all over again. Because that's what mothers do when they love someone more than they love themselves.